we have that biting bug against this biting bug. This is a championship. We're gonna have 2 more in here face off later. Now over here, the one biting bug looks like it's trying to attack the other, but not really. Now the 2 biting bugs are really getting into it, and the smaller one looks like it has a bite on the bigger one. Now the smaller one bit the bigger one, but the biting bugs have some armor. The biggest ones have some red on them, and the bigger one looks like it bit the smaller one on the jaw. And it turns out that the smaller one bit the bigger one on the jaw. Now, the smaller one's biting the bigger one on the neck. That looks deadly. Now, the smaller one looks like it's piercing the bigger one, but you can't really tell. Now, the smaller one and the bigger one are gonna fight, and the bigger one and the smaller one are back to it. Now, the smaller one is being bitten by the bigger one, I think. And the smaller one is the winner. Now, we have our next fight. The biggest one versus the second biggest one. The smallest one's going to the finals. Now, this bigger one is, and now the bigger one looks like it's trying to get ready to fight. And the bigger one has really strong jaws. And the bigger one bit the second biggest one. The biggest one bit the second biggest one, and the biggest one looks like it's killing the second biggest one. And the second biggest one, but the second biggest one still isn't out of it. And the second biggest one and the biggest one are back at it. Now, the biggest one is biting the second biggest one again. And now the second biggest one got dropped by the biggest one. Now the biggest one is biting the second biggest one once again. It looks like the biggest one's gonna head on to the finals to fight the smallest one. Now the biggest one dropped the medium one down there. And now the biggest one looks like it's biting the smaller one, and the biggest one bit the smaller one, then dropped it. Now the biggest one bites the smaller one again. No, wait, it didn't bite yet. Now it bit a little bit. Now there's a good bite from the biggest one. And the biggest one looks like it's trying to kill the smallest one, the smaller one. And the biggest one was eating the smaller one. But is the smaller one still alive? Yes, it is. Now the biggest one is eating the smaller one, and the biggest one looks like it's winning. But no, wait, this biggest one doesn't have a good bite on the smaller one, and the biggest one wins the fight. Now it's the final. The smallest one against the biggest one. Now, the smallest one seemed pretty aggressive in its fight, but the biggest one started eating the other one. Now, they're fighting, and the biggest one's bit by the smallest one. But if the biggest one gets one bite on the smallest one, it could be over. Now, the biggest one bites the smallest one. And the smallest one doesn't look like it stands a chance against the biggest one, but it just bit the biggest one. Now, the biggest one is fighting the smallest one, and the biggest one bit the smallest one. Now, the biggest one looks like it won the fight, but you never really could tell. And no, the smallest one's still alive. Now, the biggest one, smallest one fighting, and the biggest one bit the smallest one. Now, the biggest one bit the smallest one again, and you could see the biggest one's jaws, how massive they are. But the smallest one also has some jaws, strong jaws too. And the biggest one bit the smallest one on the neck. And now the smallest one doesn't look like it could handle much more. And the biggest was eating the smallest one. And the biggest one is our winner of the tournament.